Hello, and welcome back to the Wise Mind Practice Series, session number 2. My name is Allison Haidu Paulin. My pronouns are she and her. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and staff therapist at the Counseling Center. Today, I will lead you in session 2 on distress tolerance. At some point in our lives, we all have to cope with distress and pain. Either it can be physical, like stubbing a toe or having a broken arm, or it can be emotional, like sadness or anger. In most cases, the pain is often unavoidable and unpredictable. You can't anticipate when you'll break an arm or when something will make you sad. For some of us, emotional and physical pain feels more intense and occurs more frequently. The distress comes on more quickly and feels like an overwhelming tidal wave. Since we don't know what to do, we tend to deal with pain in unhealthy and unsuccessful ways, like worrying about possible future pain, mistakes, and problems, isolating ourselves from other people to avoid distressing situations, making ourselves numb with alcohol and drugs, engaging in high-risk behaviors, and avoiding dealing with our problems. These self-destructive coping strategies aren't helpful because they lead to prolonged pain. Today, our goal is to learn other ways of getting through moments of distress using skills called distress tolerance skills. It is not about changing long-term depression or chronic problems with relationships. Distress tolerance skills are about helping you endure and cope with your pain in new and healthier ways so that it does not lead to suffering. Distress tolerance skills are used to manage survival through emotional crises. It's important to know when to use them and when not to use them. Let's first define what an emotional crisis is. Keep in mind that the definition of crisis is very broad and situation dependent. Let's consider the following example. You're on the road and you get a flat tire. Assuming you know how to change a flat or who to call and have the tools to do so, this could be a simple problem-solving situation. However, let's say you're in the middle of nowhere. There's no one to help. You don't have cell reception to call for help, and you don't know how to change a tire. Or maybe you know how to change the tire, but you've had a terrible day already and are feeling burnt out and unable to handle any additional stress. You can't even begin to think about how to problem solve. Crisis survival skills can be helpful to get you to a place where you're able to then problem solve. So an emotional crisis is highly stressful, short-term, and it creates intense pressure to resolve the crisis right now. Just like when you were in the middle of nowhere with no help, it was highly stressful, short-term, and created intense pressure to solve the problem. So it can be useful to know when to use crisis survival skills and when not to. Use them when you have intense pain that can't be helped quickly, when acting on your emotion will make the situation worse, when you're feeling overwhelmed by emotions, but recognize that skills would be more effective, when you're feeling overwhelmed by emotions and yet still have to meet demands, or when the problem can't be solved immediately. For example, even if you know how to change a tire, if you're so overwhelmed and stressed that trying to change it could potentially make things worse, then crisis survival skills are needed. When you're in a crisis, it's harder to access our prefrontal cortex, which we need for problem solving and decision making. You don't need to use them with everyday problems, with solving all of life's problems, or with building a life worth living. Distress tolerance is a short-term strategy. And if you know how to change a tire and have the resources, both physical and emotional, to do it, then go ahead and change the tire. One distress tolerance skill is distraction. It can help you to endure and cope with pain in a healthier way so it doesn't lead to suffering. Distraction skills are important because they can temporarily stop you from thinking about your pain and then give you time to find an appropriate coping resource. It's also important not to confuse distraction with avoidance. Distractions are helpful in not dealing with a situation on a temporary basis. When you distract yourself from a distressing situation, it's because you intend to deal with it in the future, once your emotions have calmed down to a tolerable level. For example, you may be feeling angry about a situation, but you have to go to class. You can distract yourself from that anger so that you can focus in class, and then find time later in the day to examine and deal with your anger. You are the only one who knows whether or not you are avoiding. For example, if you're feeling stressed about studying, you could go and watch an hour of Netflix. But if in that moment you're capable of studying, would that perhaps be more avoidant than useful? Trust yourself and check in with yourself regarding whether you can truly solve a problem before jumping into distress tolerance skills. They are pleasant and can be tempting to use, but may not be the most effective strategy if you could otherwise go ahead and solve the problem. Another set of distress tolerance skills is called ACCEPTS. It's an acronym that helps us remember all of these different ways of managing in the moment. So one way is through activities, such as going for a walk, meeting a friend, building something, playing a game, cleaning a room, watching a show. Get up, get active, get involved in something that can help take your mind off whatever it's being overwhelmed with in the moment. Another skill is contributing. That can look like volunteering at an agency. It can look like giving away things that you don't need. You could send an encouraging message, help a friend or family member. It can feel really good to be able to contribute to other people, and at the same time, that takes, again, our mind off of whatever is feeling very overwhelming in the moment. Another strategy is comparisons, comparing how you're feeling now to a time when you felt different, or thinking about people coping the same as you or less well than you. There are more examples on page 4 of your workbook if you want to turn to that page or look at it again later. Another strategy is different emotions. So whatever you're feeling, if it's sadness, to go and find something that's happy or something that's funny or something that's angry. If you're feeling angry, to go find something that's funny or something that's sad. So a different emotion that you're currently feeling. You can access that through emotional stories, emotional shows, listening to emotional music. Another strategy is pushing away whatever thoughts or feelings that you're having, leaving that situation for a while mentally or physically. Mentally, it could look like a metaphor or an imaginary wall. It could look like yelling no when ruminative or repetitive thoughts come up. It could be imagining placing that thought or feeling into a box and placing it on a shelf. Another strategy is replacing it with other thoughts. So if one thought keeps coming to you, to go ahead and count all of the purple things in the room, or to count backwards from 100 by sevens, or repeat the words to a song, or work puzzles. Lots of different ways to engage in different thinking. And last strategy within ACCEPTS is other sensations. So our body and our sense of touch is a strong sensation and can help distract us from whatever emotions or thoughts that we're having. So that could be squeezing a rubber ball really hard. It could be listening to loud music. It could be going outside into the heat in the summer or the rain in the winter. It could be taking a hot shower or a cold shower or alternating between the two. The next set of distress tolerance skills are called TIP skills. They help to manage extreme external arousal and reduce feelings of being overwhelmed by changing your body chemistry. Each skill has the effect of rapidly changing your biological response patterns and thereby causing a reduction in your emotional arousal. The first skill is tipping the temperature of your face with cold water or cold packs on your face while holding your breath. This induces the human dive reflex, which in turn sets off the parasympathetic system and reduces physiological and emotional arousal very quickly. Cold water slows down your heartbeat rate, it activates your parasympathetic system, and decreases the physiological system for decreasing arousal. You can do that through putting your face into a bowl of cold water or by holding a cold pack, example of a Ziploc bag of cold water or cold water with ice, on your eyes and cheeks. The second tip skill is intense exercise for at least 20 to 30 minutes. Research has shown that intense exercise of any kind for 20 to 30 minutes or so can have a rapid effect on mood, decreasing negative mood and ruminative thoughts and increasing positive affect after exercising. Studies have found that increases in positive emotions are associated with getting your heart rate up to 55 to 70% of the maximum heart rate for your age. And the increases are maintained for a significantly longer time following exercise when you get your heart rate to that 70% intensity. Feel free to look up calculating heart rate training zones on your search engine to estimate maximum recommended heart rate for your age. Anger organizes the body to attack or defend. Fear organizes the body to run, and so on. When the body is highly aroused, it can be difficult to inhibit emotional action, even if the action is dysfunctional. Intense exercise in these situations can re-regulate the body to a less emotional state. When should you use it? Use it when you're agitated, angry, when ruminating just won't stop, when you need to bring up your mood and willingness in the morning, or any other time that it's been useful for you in the past. As an example, at the end of a workday, you might find out that a report you thought was due in a week is actually due tomorrow. If you don't get the report done, you're going to have big problems at work. So you feel so overwhelmed by this unexpected demand, you don't know where to start to get things done. With that kind of time, it can be helpful to take a short break, go for a run or brisk walk to decrease the strong negative emotions. And then you're able to return and do what is needed to finish your report by its deadline. The third tip skill is paced breathing, which is another way to lower your blood pressure by slowing down the pace of inhaling and exhaling and shifting the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in your body. Breathing out should be slower than breathing in. To complete a breathing cycle, it takes about 10 to 12 seconds. This is another way of reducing emotional arousal and activating our parasympathetic system, particularly through the long and slow exhalation. I will model it for you and then guide you through it, and then you can take some time to practice on your own. It can be helpful to do this every day. And you can do it sitting or laying down. What you'll do is place one hand on your stomach and one on your chest. And you want to feel the hand on the stomach moving in and out rather than the hand on the chest. We'll take a deep breath in through our nose. As we inhale, we'll count in our mind 1, 2, 3, 4. You can vary the pace of that according to your own sort of lung capacity. Important not to hurt yourself. And we'll imagine using the air we breathe in to push against our hand on our stomach. And then we'll hold that for a count of 2. And then exhale through our mouth like blowing out a candle. Exhale for a count of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And pause before starting again. Now I will show you. We're placing one hand on our chest and one hand on our stomach. We want to feel the stomach move in and out more than the hand on our chest. So taking a deep breath in through our nose and counting to 4. Holding that for a count of 2. And exhaling through the mouth like blowing out a candle to 5. Now let's all try together. Breathing in for a count of 4. Holding for a count of 2. And breathing out for a count of 5. And again, breathing in for a count of 4. Holding for a count of 2. Breathing out for 5. Feel free to stop the video and practice on your own. Another option is you can pair that breathing with progressive muscle relaxation. And there's instructions here on the screen to do that. There's also a separate video that we've provided on the Student Counseling Center playlist at the Pacific University's YouTube channel that walks you through that in a very measured fashion and is a really helpful video to watch. So I will let you practice that on your own. Some simple relaxation and soothing activities can be found on page 6 of your workbook. And page 10 has instructions to create your very own self-soothing kit. These activities are meant to bring a small amount of peace in your life. So if it doesn't help you feel relaxed or makes you feel worse, then feel free to skip over it or pass it by. Try some out and find what works best for you. As you can see, they're arranged by the senses, and I'll go over a few examples of them. With your sense of vision, it can be helpful to think about getting out into nature or finding pictures of nature or images of nature. You could also find pictures of loved ones and look at those, whether those are pictures on your phone or photographs that you've printed out or posters on your wall. Also being able to look at maybe a candle's flame or to view a dance performance. To soothe through the sense of hearing, you might consider listening to music or creating your own music if you play an instrument, or humming or singing. Some people like to listen to the sounds of nature, the sound of a babbling brook or of ocean waves. Relaxed Melodies is one way you can do that, and there's lots of other apps as well. Through your sense of smell, there's lots of scented products, whether that's lotion or perfume or incense. Again, nature is another source of connecting with your sense of smell, whether that's sun on pine needles or the fresh salt air. Baking is another excellent way to soothe through smell, baking bread or cookies, as well as having maybe a cup of tea or coffee and smelling that as you're drinking that. Taste is another way to soothe your senses, whether that's particular food. I think of oranges myself, or some flavored gum. It could be, again, drinking tea or coffee. And it could be eating something very mindfully and just focusing on that sense. Touch is another way of soothing through senses. You can do that through lotion. You could do that through different textures, whether that's a silky blanket that you have or a velvety purse or bag. It could be massage on your hands or on your back or shoulders. It could also be petting an animal, a cat or a dog that you have. Let's look at ways to help you cope after you've practiced the skills of distract and relax. There are many distressing times in life when we all need to hear some encouraging words to keep us motivated or to help us endure the pain that we're experiencing. This can often be done with self-encouraging coping thoughts. Coping thoughts are statements that remind you of your strength, your past successes, and some commonly held truths. They're listed here on your screen. Some of my favorites that I use regularly are, these are just my feelings, and eventually they'll go away. They'll change. My feelings make me feel uncomfortable right now, but I can accept them. And this too shall pass. What are your favorites? On page 7 in your workbook, you can place a check mark by the ones that you consider powerful and motivating. You can copy and paste them into another document. You can write them on sticky notes around your room or apartment. You can put them as the lock screen on your phone. You can make them the background on your laptop. The more often you see these self-affirming and soothing thoughts, the quicker they'll become an automatic part of your thought processes. Part of the practice of Wise Mind is holding two seemingly opposite views at the same time. So now that you've learned very active skills to manage distress, I'd like to offer another perspective. Often when we experience pain, we get stuck in the stories we tell ourselves about that pain. It's not there. It's always going to be this way. I can't control it. I can't cope. And somewhere something did this to me. Unfortunately, no matter what story you find yourself going through, your pain still exists, and you continue to suffer. Sometimes, the more upset you get, the worse your pain will feel. and the more you'll try to push it away, finding yourself more and more stuck. This gets in the way of you being able to make a change, because before you can make any changes to your situation, you first have to accept that the painful situation has occurred. By getting angry and thinking that a situation should never have happened, you're missing the point that it did happen and that you have to deal with it. Radical acceptance is another perspective you can take to get unstuck from these stories. To radically accept something is to acknowledge your present situation without judging the events or criticizing yourself or others. Instead, it's about trying to recognize that your present situation exists. Radical acceptance means looking at yourself and the situation and seeing it as it really is. This does not mean that you condone or agree with what happened, but it does mean that you stop trying to change what has already happened and start refocusing your attention on what you can do now. I'm now going to show you a video that demonstrates the concept of radical acceptance. As you watch this video, focus on the host's experience and how the metaphor fits within the context of your life.
Imagine one day you decide to throw a party for all your friends. You get out your phone and you start inviting people. You want a really big party, so you say, anyone can come. And on the big day, you get your place ready for the party. And you're really excited to see everyone. And pretty soon, the guests all start arriving. After a while, everyone you're expecting has arrived and you're having a really good time. But then the doorbell goes, and you think, I wonder who that is. Must be someone I've forgotten about. And it is. Someone who you definitely did not want at the party. It's your neighbour Brian. Brian has to be one of the most annoying people you know. He's rude, grumpy, he moans a lot, and he's not so flash on personal hygiene. He's the last person you want at your party. But before you know it, he goes straight inside without even saying hello. And he goes up to your guests and he's rude. He helps himself to drinks and food. And he generally acts a little weird towards your friends. And understandably, you feel pretty upset, embarrassed and angry. And before long, you go over to Brian and tell him, that's it, it's time for you to go. And you throw him out of your party. And once he's gone, you feel relieved. You go back to the party and start to enjoy yourself. But after a while, you hear the doorbell again. And when you go to check who it is, you realize Brian has come back. And before you can stop him, he opens the door and races back into the party. So you go out and get him and throw him out again. This time though, you decide you're going to make sure he doesn't come back. So you decide to stand by the door and make sure he can't get back in. And this works fine. Brian can't get back in and you feel good about this. Trouble is, you realize that all the while you're missing out on the party. You can hear everyone else outside having a good time. You want to be out at the party too. But because you can't stand Brian, you can't risk him coming back in again. And you don't know what to do. You really want to enjoy the party, but the thought of Brian being there really gets to you. After a while, you realize that, actually, this party is pretty important to you, and you want to be with your friends, at the very least just to make sure they're okay. So you decide to go back out, and you say to yourself, if Brian comes out, that's how it goes. And sure enough, after a couple of minutes, Brian comes back in and starts being annoying again. But this time something's different. You don't ignore him, because he's pretty hard to ignore, but you decide just to get on with the party and talk with your friends, and you start to notice some interesting things. First, you find that even though Brian is still there, you're actually having an okay time. Sure, it'd be better if he went home, but at least you're not stuck at the door, missing out on the party. Second, you notice that when you're not trying to get rid of him all the time, he calms down a little bit. He's still a pain and still smells, but he's not so rowdy. And then after that, you start to notice some other things about Brian you hadn't actually seen before. Like that he has a quirky sense of humour, even though it's buried pretty deep. And he even makes a couple of friends of yours laugh. And you wonder to yourself, what will you do next time you have a party?
What did you notice? What did the main character do to help himself have a good time at the party? How did he practice radical acceptance? He was choosing to engage with his friends at the risk of Brian showing up, rather than keeping Brian out by standing at the door and missing out on his party. He was actually able to have a good time by accepting Brian's behaviors. Notice that he wasn't agreeing with them or condoning them, but he was accepting that they were happening, and he was able to refocus on what was important to him. When he was trying to get rid of Brian at the beginning, he wasn't able to enjoy the party, and he was stuck trying to manage Brian. And then he actually started seeing Brian in a different light. So his practice of radical acceptance did not lead to suffering. It led to pain, yes. It also allowed him to focus on what was important, which was being at the party and enjoying his friends. It wasn't approval or resignation. Radical acceptance requires a willing choice that you might have to make over and over and over again. As you can see, radical acceptance is a process that takes a lot of practice. So I've collected some tips and pointers here for you. One of the hardest parts is recognizing when you're being judgmental of yourself and others. It's helpful to recognize that you're going to make mistakes. There will be times when you'll be judgmental, and then you'll recognize what you're doing, and you'll be further critical of yourself for being judgmental of being judgmental. It's okay, that's part of the process. When you radically accept something, you're completely releasing judgment of it and avoiding any attempts to fight against it or change it. And each time you notice that fighting coming up or that changing or that judgment, that's another chance to practice letting go of that judgment. Again, it doesn't mean that you approve of what happened or approve of the poor behaviors of other people or your own behaviors. What it means is that you stop trying to change what's already happened. Stop trying to change the past, and you stop worrying about the future. Your goal is to focus energies on what you can do now, in the present moment, to improve your situation. One way to practice radical acceptance is to identify certain common judgmental words and phrases that you say to yourself, and use those when they pop up as a reminder to stop and observe what's happening. Some common judgmental words include right, wrong, good, bad, should, shouldn't, fair, unfair, perfect, and terrible. One caveat, very important caveat about radical acceptance, is that we do not accept situations in which you are in physical danger or being emotionally, verbally, physically, or sexually abused. In these situations, get help immediately. One major Pacific University campus resource for all students, wherever they're located, is our 24/7 support and crisis line. And that number is 503-352-2999. This brings us to the end of our session today. I've provided some additional resources here on your screen. These are also listed on page 13 of your workbook. Please visit the different websites, read the books, practice with the apps. Utilizing distress tolerance skills takes time and practice. Thank you for taking the time today to learn about these distress tolerance skills to help build your own emotional resiliency. We hope that you join us for our third session in the series and our final one on emotion regulation.